Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, sexy people. How are you feeling? What have you been up to this week? Anything cool? Anything more exciting to me? I've gone straight back to my natural habitat this past week after my incident with the police. I've gone back straight into my natural habitat of being indoors, trying to stay warm, and just hacking away on the computer in my pajamas in true rock and roll style. I mean, don't believe what you see in those Instagram posts. If anyone that follows me on Instagram or Facebook would genuinely believe that I spend all my time walking around in a leather jacket and boots, it's not true, man. It's not true. I spend probably 99% of my time in the house in the same hoodie with a beard, just like a fucking hermit, pale, like a vampire, you know what I mean? Just scared of the daylight. And doing everything I can to avoid other human beings. That's my general policy, I think. If the roads were empty and the streets were empty, you'd probably see a lot more of me outdoors. But, there are several contributing factors as to why I spend most of my time indoors. And my recent experience with the police, jumping me in my car, kind of proves why I'm better off staying inside. But I get a lot of shit done in these four walls, man. It's been a very productive week in terms of making plans for next year for the band. After such a long hiatus that we've had now with the 2-year pandemic, and also my family situation that I had for most of this year has given us 3 years kind of in the pit stop, So, I've been chatting to some awesome third parties who are going to hopefully be a part of us relaunching ourselves back out there into what is hopefully going to be a much better year in 2023 after what has been an absolutely fucking challenging and awful 2022. So first, I'm going to get this Christmas thing out of the way. I'm going to do lots of relaxing. I'm going to do lots of trying to stay warm if I can. Maybe I have to remortgage the house, so that I can afford to pay that gas bill to heat the fucking thing. But January, I'll be coming out those gates swinging. You watch me. But first, we've got another awesome guest. And I'm so glad we managed to make this happen before the year is out. Because I think it's a perfect time to have an end-of-year reminder and summary of where we're at currently with some global issues that are of utmost importance to all of our lives moving forward, and also so that we can be armed with the knowledge that we need to collectively come out of the gate swinging in 2023 in order to take action on these pressing, urgent issues. And because I'm so good to you ungrateful bastards, I've managed to get the one and only Mr. Charlie Kronick to come and speak with us. If you don't know, Charlie Kronick is a senior program advisor at Greenpeace UK. He has worked in the fields of environment and development as an activist, campaigner and writer for nearly 30 years. So he knows what he's talking about, and we're super lucky to have him with us today to share his knowledge and time with us. Charlie, we appreciate you being here. Thanks so much for doing this, man. How you doing this fine and cold morning?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, I'm doing fine, I guess, in the context of the general shit show in which we are all inhabiting right now.
Yes.
Whenever anybody asks me how I'm doing, I think, should we ever tell people how we're really doing? Nah, let's not do that. Anyway, so I'm good and I'm happy to be here.
So that's the fake answer. So that leads me perfectly into the what I think is probably going to hint towards the real answer, which is I wanted to kick off with, where are we at currently with the climate emergency? I know that's a massive question, but what's the general status?
I think, to be really absolutely blunt, we are hanging on by our fingernails, right? I think that the technical possibility of avoiding the worst impacts of climate change are still available to us. That means, rapid decarbonization of, our power system, of our transport systems, the way we heat our homes, changes in diet, which are going to be both necessary and probably necessarily good for us as well. Less processed food, more local food, less meat and dairy. All of those things are possible to do to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. The real question is, will people do them? And will the institutions that set the framework for our behavior do them? And I think it's really important. This is, what you do, what I do, what we do as communities is really crucial. But even if you total up all the individual decisions that people, particularly in the global north, in the minority world, make, those individual decisions, that no matter how great your personal commitment is to doing the right thing, it won't be enough. We actually have to change the structure of the country we live in. Now, we do that all the time. We've changed the way we use telecommunications. We've changed the way we use IT. We've changed the way we transport ourselves around, and we move so much more. All of those changes are possible, but they're not down to single individual choices. And I think it's really important to get that on the table, because it's very easy for, whether you're an oil company to say, well, our customers want to buy this stuff, or if you're government saying, well, this is what citizens want. It's what they're offered, and if you're offered a choice between something that's okay and something that's going to definitely make you miserable, you're not going to go for miserable, are you? So I think there is an absolute political necessity that we make this central to the way we look at the way the world's going to be. And that's a little bit uncomfortable, because it's much easier to say, well, if I do my best, it's going to be fine, because it probably won't be.
Well, that leads pretty much straight into the next thing that I wanted to ask you. I mean, I want to come on to what differences we can make on an individual basis in our daily lives, but I think we should save that right until the end before we sort of establish the terrain here. Because it seems to me from previous conversations that I've had on the podcast is that, this comes down essentially to systemic change. Unless we have systemic structural change which needs to be signed off and sanctioned by, unfortunately, by the boys upstairs, then nothing.
And they are mostly boys, unfortunately. Still,
exactly. Yes, then very little is going to happen, which is just the sad fact of it. And as you said, we are clinging on by our fingernails right now. I mean, I don't think anybody needs this spelling out for them at this stage. But what are the main factors that are driving? What are the priority number ones that are driving this? I'm thinking about, obviously, fossil fuels, agriculture. I think is a big one, which ties into the way that we consume food and other things. What are the biggies that we really have to tackle?
Well, so the way you're absolutely right. The combustion, the burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas, is the principal driver of climate change. It is the biggest single contributor. So that means the way we generate electricity, the way we heat our homes and offices, buildings generally, but also the kind of heat that we use for industrial things like making steel, making glass, making concrete. So energy and the use of energy, and unfortunately the use of fossil fuels, is embedded right into literally every single thing we do. And we need to get the carbon out of it, or we need to get those activities out of our lives. And it is possible to do that with renewable electricity, renewable heat. But the reality is, we not only have to have better energy, we have to use less energy. So some of that's technical and some of that's lifestyle, but basically that's at the heart of it. Then what's in the business called land use change, but what everybody realizes is deforestation, the cutting down, not just of tropical rainforests, but also of the temperate rainforests in the far north of Europe, across Russia, the Scandinavian countries, Canada, parts of North America where I'm from. We have to stop deforestation and the dieback of forests in those places. And the thing that binds all of that together, both fossil fuel use and energy use and deforestation, is of course agriculture, because agriculture is energy intensive in the sense that it uses fertilizers which are made from fossil fuels. There is a lot of mechanization and a lot of transport of global commodities around. But the biggest problem is, of course, the intensification. It's a terrible jargon word, isn't it? The way we create industrial meat, the way we create industrial dairy, it's on a huge scale. It clears enormous amounts of land, first of all, which is negative for the climate in and of itself. Then grows crops which are then fed to animals, either for meat production or dairy, which is both inefficient in terms of the way we use the land. It uses a lot of energy to produce a lot less calories for us. But also dairy and animals produce methane. They burp, they fart, they emit. Methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas, like carbon dioxide. And we don't have to make this a science lesson, but the reality is that the two big gases driving global warming, global heating, are carbon dioxide, which lives for a very long time in the atmosphere and has a pretty powerful effect, and methane, the stuff that comes from both natural gas but also from burping and farting animals, is a very powerful greenhouse gas. It doesn't last as long in the atmosphere, but its impact is huge. So if we are looking at this in terms of priorities, actually reducing the impact of industrial agriculture in the short term would have really big benefits, as well as not just for the climate, but for our diet as well, I imagine. So there are lots of things we can do, but those are the big things. So just to recap, combustion of fossil fuels for electricity, heat, and transport. Deforestation, in other words, just removing the forest lands which house and sequester huge amounts of carbon. And then finally, reforming our agriculture system, which means that we are not so dependent on intensively reared stuff, which adds a huge amount of extra warming to the atmosphere.
Oh, that's brilliantly put, man. Yeah, that was a perfect encapsulation of the main issues we've got to deal with there. And as you said as well, all of these things, will affect us on a personal health basis as well, and quality of life basis. Not that should be the motive, but I mean, a small change in someone's diet, for example. Like, I'm not suggesting we've all got to go like, hardcore vegan overnight, but just going vegetarian 2 days a week, for example, would have a massive impact on the environment and the world's dependence on industrial agriculture, which in itself drives deforestation and pollution and, of course, the cruelty to the animals as well. But I'm just using that as an example to highlight the fact that I think small changes done collectively and en masse, can make a big difference and do have big knock-on effects,
I think a small change, and I think it's important to talk about what we do as individuals in the context of bigger change. And I think that, that's an important point. Making the right choice within a system in which there are right choices to be made, it's definitely a win-win. And that doesn't just apply to your diet. I mean, human powered transport, walking, riding a bike, there are plenty of people, and I think it's really important to note this. There are lots of people in this country and all around the world who can't depend only on human powered transport, but there are lots who can, walking to school, walking to local shops, that's, riding a bicycle, that is, again, good for your health as well as good for local air quality, and good for the climate. So there are definite, win-win situations here. I think it's just, we have to be really careful about not flipping it around. So all the responsibility is on a single parent trying to get their kids to school while then getting to work.
Yeah.
Of course that would, that's not good for anybody.
100%, yeah. And I think for me that's a big source of guilt is waste. I mean, we're very diligent in our household. We recycle everything. Our bin bag goes out like, once a fortnight and there's hardly anything in it, what I mean? Because we're so diligent with the recycling and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And but it's the food waste, man. It's like, because we are so dependent now on supermarkets. I mean, don't get me wrong. If I genuinely had the choice where I live to hand pick all of my fruit and veg, from a local trader, then goddamn, I would do it. But unfortunately, and given our lifestyles these days as well, we have, unfortunately, for the most part, I think, become dependent on supermarket chains. Especially if you're on a budget. But the problem is that you can't just buy what you need. If you're going to buy meat, for example, it comes in a massive giant box, for a family of 8. And for a household like ours, we're just throwing most of it out. As much as we hate to do it, it feels quite unavoidable. And it's a major source of guilt and waste and frustration because, if you contact a food bank, most of the time, they can't store food that needs refrigeration. They can only store, tinned and dried foods. So we just throw in tons of fruit and veg out every week, and it's because we're forced to have to buy 10 times as much as we want.
Yeah.
So, what's the solution there? Because I feel like that taps into quite a few different problems, doesn't it? It taps into the hegemony of the major supermarket chains, squashing and forcing out of the market, the smaller independent local traders, and also it taps into the waste issue and the nature of how we get our food and the whole supply chain of destruction that feeds that.
Well, now you're asking. I think that there's a school of thought that you have to fix everything if you're going to fix anything, right? And, what's the answer to the question you just asked? The answer probably is, corporate capitalism depends, and I'm using capitalism in quotes here, right? Corporate capitalism depends on economies of scale. It depends on huge, long supply chains, and it really, really benefits from a mass-produced, mass consumption approach. And the clue's in the title. There is going to be waste in mass consumption and definitely in mass production. And we don't just lose, it's not just material waste. We lose our humanity. Everything becomes a transaction.
Yes.
Every relationship becomes transactional. And I think that not to go all meta on you here, is an underlying problem when we're trying to challenge this. Because you know what it is, I think the idea that economies can endlessly grow exponentially, as opposed to people's well-being growing, which is, I think, a very different thing than the economy growing, is a tension that lies right at the heart of whether we're talking about food waste, energy waste, economies of scale, and the global economy. And there's, the easy answers to these questions, if they ever existed, that ship sailed a long time ago. And I think we're going to be facing now a series of questions that, I'm a campaigner. What we do here at Greenpeace is we try to make change happen. So what you do as a campaigner, I'm going to give away a few trade secrets here, is you set an objective. What's the thing we want to happen? And then you work back from it. So, we want to, overarching, we want to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, the catastrophic impacts of climate change. We also want to make sure that the impacts that we can't avoid aren't heaped totally unfairly on the least powerful. And that includes people who are facing economic, health, and other challenges, not just here in the UK, but globally. And right now, that is a disproportionately landing on people in the global south. So what used to be called developing countries. So people who've done the absolute least to create the problems we have around climate change, around biodiversity loss, you name it, are suffering the worst impacts of it. And part of our response to climate change is going to be, how do we bake genuine justice, or fairness, if you want to use a language that's a bit more personal, into the settlement? And that is going to be hard, and it's going to mean that people in rich countries, even people who aren't rich in rich countries, are going to have to, I hate to use this expression, we're all going to have to suck it up.
Yeah.
And that if this is going to be fair, and I think we all want this to be a fair solution to this problem, we're going to have to make some changes that we didn't expect. My parents, I'm an old guy, so my parents, my dad served in the Second World War. My parents grew up in the Depression. Their assumption was that the world was going to get better and better, and their children's lives were going to get easier and easier, and everything with all that rising tide would float all boats. And I know they genuinely believed that, and they wanted that to be true, and that was the legacy they wanted to hand on. And I want to hand that on to my kids too. But you know what? I think that window got a lot smaller. That opportunity for a better life for everybody, is the definition of that has changed. And we really, really need to, this is a process. There's not going to be a single switch we flip that means, hey, this is all going to be grand. Right. It means that we're going to have to keep evaluating the changes we make. The faster we make them, the less awful they're going to be. The slower we make them, the harder it's going to get. So that's that's a very long answer to the question, what do you do about supermarkets? But I think it does, that's where it comes down. That's where the rubber hits the road for all of us here, particularly in a country like the UK, which, for all the hardship that everybody is currently facing right now for a whole bunch of reasons, if you think it's bad here, it's a whole lot worse in places like sub-Saharan Africa, rural Chile or Argentina. And I think, we just can't solve this problem without acknowledging that it's a global one, not just a local one.
Yeah, 100%. And as you say, that is an answer to the question of what can we do about supermarkets, because everything is connected, isn't it? You know what I mean? On a global scale, everything has ramifications from the small to the large. And one thing that really confuses me, and I'm not sure what your thoughts might be on this, why is there, given everything you just said then about, you want the best for your children and your grandchildren, as everybody does, why is there so much resistance to this from the elites, who are, for the most part, highly educated, highly intelligent, a lot of them are not, I suppose that's debatable. How you define intelligence?
Well, educated if not intelligent.
Yes, but they're aware of this, and they know the part. Surely they know the part they play in this, and surely they feel the same way about their children and their grandchildren. So why do they continue to force all of us down the path of guaranteed mutual self-destruction?
That's a really important question, and I think there's a number of different answers. I think the first one is, if you're, so I spend a lot of my working life is dealing with financial institutions, banks and the people who look after pension funds, asset managers, big insurance companies, people like that. And, I meet a lot of these people. Some of them are probably, lords of darkness, but a lot of the people I meet are, they are perfectly lovely people, frankly. They're absolutely nice. And as you say, they care about their kids and they care about their kids' future. But everything about the rules that frame their day-to-day decision making at work are based on 3-month periods of time. So their incentives, their remuneration, their bonuses are based on how well they do every 3 months.
Right.
So quarterly. What they would consider a long-term decision making might be 3 to 5 years. You combine that with, and they all say, "Oh yes, we're in this for the long haul." Yeah, they are, but in terms of the things that make them drive their decision making, they have to make decisions based on very short time frames, which, for better or worse, oddly corresponds with what's called the electoral cycle. 2 years, 4 years, 5 years in a democracy,
right.
and democracy in quotes. However you choose to define that, and it just means that the rules of the game, and particularly the financial incentives, do not favor making decisions that are tough in the short term, but way better in the longer term.
Right.
So that's a generous way of looking at it. A less generous way of looking at why do elites, hold on to the status quo as it's currently constituted, is that people, and again, as a very privileged, late middle-aged white dude, I am aware of the fact that people who have power don't want to give it up.
Right.
Even if you're not aware that you got it. It feels like, oh, but isn't this the way things are? What we experience. And I think sometimes it's malicious, sometimes it's unconscious, sometimes it's driven by the rules and the structures in which we operate. But it's a kind of perfect storm of inactivity. And then layered on top of that, there has been some absolutely, without question, malevolent, bad intentioned, malintent lobbying particularly from the fossil fuel industries and from some governments that are petrostates that are totally dependent on fossil fuels. They don't want to speed this process up because the longer they can, squeeze the last drop financially and literally of oil or gas out of the ground, the better off they are. And that's the reality. And this year it was interesting that we've just finished the big climate conference. It was in Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt, and this year there were 630, I believe, registered representatives of the fossil fuel industry there. They know which way the wind is blowing. They are not there to say, how can we help you speed up this transition? They are there to say, how can we make sure that our interests remain at the heart of this decision-making process for as long as possible? It's simply a good future for the fossil fuel industry is not a good future for anybody else. And we've got to, and that's true if you're a banker, that's true if you're a member of parliament or congressman in the United States, or if you're a prime minister or president. But until decision makers, because I think a lot of people, real people, have realized that if oil and gas do well, the rest of us do very badly. We're noticing that this winter, right?
Yeah.
And I think that reality is becoming, very, very easy to grasp for everybody who isn't in the fossil fuel business.
I think it's insanity, and I think it might actually be a form of sociopathy. If you look at it on a global scale, it certainly would look like a manifestation of the 1% of sociopaths in society have hoodwinked the good folks that constitute the rest of us into giving them all the gold. It looks as if the sociopaths are running the train off the edge of the cliff. If you look at it on a global scale with outside eyes, it's madness.
Yeah, if you look at this any way, but from a very particular point of view, it's like this is going to make our lives a whole lot less comfortable. It's going to make our lives a whole lot more expensive. That's if you have the choices about, being able to spend or not spend. It's going to impoverish the natural world in terms of, the number of species, the kind of, the damage that climate change will do to the world we live in physical terms is almost incomprehensible.
Yeah.
And it's tragic. It is genuinely tragic, no matter how you look at it. So, when you look at it in those terms, you frame it up in those terms, you think, why would anybody or any institution vote for, maintaining this incredibly destructive pathway and trajectory we're on? And, I think you laid it out. It is sociopathic behavior. That's a generous way of putting it, psychopathic if you want to be, ungenerous. But, spins back to where we started. Is it possible to avoid the worst impacts of the mess we're in? Yeah, absolutely, 100%. It just won't be easy, and we've left it unbelievably late. And that's but we, as they say on the cop shows, we are where we are. There's no magic time machine to go back. Oh, if we'd only done this 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I've been doing this work for, I've been doing it for over 30 years now. Yeah. And, you do think, oh, if only that had happened then, we wouldn't be facing these challenges now. But, coulda, woulda, shoulda, doesn't get you anywhere. You have to deal with the reality we face now.
So what are we looking at in terms of a timeline then? I mean, if we don't change anything at all, if we stay on the trajectory that we're currently on, exactly as we are, what are we looking at in terms of a timeline?
Well, so if there are a lot of really smart people, much smarter than me, who've been looking at this. And if you look at the models that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is that big UN convened body of scientists, has looked at, that based on there are thousands, certainly hundreds of range of different possible outcomes in these scenarios. But putting all that to one side, if nothing changed after today, we're on track for about 2.5 to 3 degrees warming by the end of this century.
Wow.
Now, let's put that into context. We have experienced already just over 1 degree of global average temperature rise since about 1860. And I think we can say with confidence, not certainty, but with confidence, that 1 degree temperature rise has driven the kind of flooding we're seeing around the world, the kind of heat waves we're seeing around the world, some of the weird cold snaps sometimes you see where you get a sort of polar incursion because of weakening of the jet stream. There is no question that the warming we are already experiencing is creating pretty extreme outcomes. And if particularly, again, if you're in a vulnerable community, coastal city, whether it's Miami, New York, or, somewhere in Bangladesh, you are really, and we are really vulnerable to those things. That is a third of the way of where we could be within the next 50 to 70 years. So it is sobering, it's scary, and we should take it very, very seriously. In terms of getting on track to avoid the worst impacts, basically, we need to reduce global emissions and end deforestation. Nothing to it, right? By 2030. End deforestation and have emissions.
Okay.
So cut emissions in half and end deforestation. Ending deforestation is a possibility. That's a political decision and a commercial and set of financial decisions. It's not easy, but it's definitely possible. I think we're getting very, very close. Is it possible to reduce global carbon dioxide emissions by 50% or 45% in the next 7 years? Technically, yeah, but it is really, really tight. And it's, I think what we're looking at now is, and again, I'm going to use some jargon here, but hopefully can unpack this, which is the idea of overshoot. So in other words, global average temperature goes up beyond 1.5 degrees of that, pre-industrial average. And then over time, we bring it back down. And the question is, how much time do we allow it to overshoot? I think avoiding any overshoot is going to be tough, not impossible, but very, very difficult. But let me and I think the other thing I would say before trying to answer another really depressing question is that every 1/10 of a degree is worth fighting for. Right. Every 1/10 of a degree beyond 1 degree where we already are is going to make the world worse for somebody, for sure, and probably for everybody. Right. And so I'm not saying that, and Greenpeace is definitely not saying that 1.5 isn't possible. I'm just saying because it's hard and because it's getting harder doesn't mean that you have to give up. Now, I know I sound like a football coach or something here. This isn't about a pep talk. I am relentlessly realistic, and I don't think you could do this work without being relentlessly realistic. Right. But I think that we just have to. If we want to avoid the worst impacts, you never ever give up on the toughest target. It just means that every day that goes by gets a little harder.
Well, we don't have a choice, do we?
No, we don't.
Not being hopeful and giving up and sitting on our hands and hoping for the best is not a choice. We have to find hope and morale in any way that we can to keep it moving. What role does population rise play in this? Does it make a difference, or does it matter on the lifestyles that those populations are living under?
Oh, well, now there you've answered the question right there. I mean, the numbers. Let me take a step back from that, because I think you have highlighted the fact it's not how many people you got, is what the people we have, how they live. I think way back in the day, sort of late 60s, early 70s, there was a guy called Paul Ehrlich who he wrote a book called The Population Bomb. And I remember hearing him speak when I was in school, and it was scary as hell. And you're thinking, oh my God, and it leads you to this sort of, People's Republic of China, one child policy kind of approach. And it's all about the numbers. And the reason that happened was that, and he was not a bad man, but he carried over this idea of carrying capacity from sort of population biology, looking at a square meter or a hectare, acre of land, and say, this is how much life you can sustain on this.
Right.
But that's a natural closed system. We are making decisions all the time about the way we generate our energy, about the way we grow our food, about the way we move around the planet, about the things we eat. All of those variables determine. And, let's be absolutely honest about this. The impact of me, when I was growing up, I was born in Minnesota, is probably 8, 9 times, 10 times what a child born in Sub-Saharan Africa in the same year, 1955, as I was born. So no, it's not about the numbers. It's about the lives that those populations lead, the way, what we consume, the way we consume, the amount we consume. So, I find it sad, and not just, it's more than a little bit xenophobic and verging on racist when people say, but it's all about numbers, because where they're talking about numbers is places in the global south where people are brown or black, and that's uncomfortable, and they may not mean that, and it's worth digging into it, and you have to have, I think, patient and respectful conversations, not just say that's bollocks, but it is bollocks. But there are reasons why it's bollocks, and they need to be unpacked.
Brilliant answer. Well, the second myth that I wanted to unpack before we rapidly move on to some solutions, because I could throw all these questions at you all day, but we need to get onto the happy news. But one thing, obviously, speaking about Western lifestyles again, and the guilt that we all feel on a daily basis, is recycling. I mean, what's the deal with recycling? Are we wasting our time? Because as far as I can tell, it's either ending up in the sea or in Hong Kong. Is any of this stuff getting recycled?
Turkey actually is where most of the UK waste goes. Right. Recycling, it's a great concept, isn't it? Recycling is, and I'm going to put my hand up here, I am not an expert on plastics.
Okay.
The simple answer is, recycling doesn't do anything to solve the problems of climate change. So you can, if you recycle everything in your house, fine. If it's genuinely recycled, that's a good thing. It's not going to be the thing that means that you're moving your own individual lives. And I know we are moving towards decision making in that space, towards it. And I think the biggest problem is that recycling has become a huge scam, and the difference between recycling and recyclable. And we make very, very complex products, usually of very, very complicated sets of materials. I mean, just take a modern car. I know that, for example, I think it was Volkswagen and Volvo, but this is neither endorsement nor criticism, made commitments to make the components of their cars recyclable. But I don't know if you drive a car, but have you ever tried to recycle a car? It would be, you can't do it. And I think that, you get a tray, a plastic tray from the supermarket that's got one of those triangles and a number on the bottom, and you assume that means, oh, well, that says it's recyclable. Well, first of all, if it's black, the optical sensors won't pick it up. So it just flows right through the recycling and into the landfill. Second of all, if it's a particular compound that you're local authority doesn't have a contract with a recycling company to recycle that particular plastic compound, it ends up in landfill. There are just so many variables, and I think that as a concept and as a solution, it's been massively oversold. And of course, then you just end up with the problem of it all ending up in a container and going to Turkey or Vietnam or a country where people are willing to deal with our crap. And I think that, last week the world's first plastic treaty negotiations, global plastic treaty negotiations ended. And unfortunately, it looks just exactly like every other kind of global treaty. Industry shows up in force and explains why they can't do the thing that we need to do. You know what? We just need to have less shit.
Yeah,
I think that, that's what it comes down to.
100%. Yeah, exactly. I think underpinning a lot of what I'm hearing today, I think, is a shift in values. What are our values essentially as a society? You mentioned on the sense of transactional relationships earlier. I think that is a lot to do with the capitalistic, materialistic mindset as well that's become pervasive now in how we interact with ourselves and each other. I think underpinning a lot of this is a change in values, but they're quite lofty ideals for the time frame that we're talking about. So I want to move quickly on then, because I'm staring sideways at the clock here because I know I've got to leave you soon.
We're good.
Okay,
we're
cool.
Good for time.
This is great stuff. But I want to try and move towards the solutions and alternatives if possible. Sure. So in terms of moving away from necessarily abstract notions like value systems and stuff, what are the actual tangible alternatives to some of the big major problems that we've got?
Well, okay. So, we were talking earlier about what are the biggest contributors to global climate change and disruption of the climate. And the way we generate power and electricity and heat is, it's still the biggest single one. There are different ways to count it up, but it's still the biggest one. There are right now, without question, the widgets are out there to turn our electricity system into a zero carbon system. And the UK actually, has a recommendation that the UK should be totally zero carbon in our electricity production by 2030. And there's no reason we can't do it.
That exists now.
That is the recommendation of the Committee on Climate Change to the government. I think the government's plan is 2035, but the recommendation is that it's absolutely, not only is it possible, it's written in law, and we should, we absolutely should be doing it. Look at what's going on obviously we're in the middle of a catastrophic and absolutely tragic and totally avoidable war on mainland Europe for the first time in since the 40s. That's even older than me. And what that has done, besides drive the price of gas through the roof, is that it's made, I think, decision makers realize that if you're dependent on gas, it doesn't matter where you get your gas. You're always going to be dependent on that commodity in the market. And I think there is every likelihood, for all the worst reasons you could possibly imagine, that the move away from the use of gas, both for generating electricity and for heating homes and industrial use of gas, is going to be massively accelerated by the totally unjustifiable war in the Ukraine. That's not to say that's not a silver lining. That's not making that's not a Christotunity. It's absolutely tragic, but it has sharpened the minds of decision makers. So decarbonizing that's such a terrible word, decarbonizing. Getting the fossil fuels out of our electricity system, out of our heating systems, out of industry is something we can do, almost, particularly in Europe, we can do almost entirely by the end of this decade.
And what is that, solar, wind, or a combination of
solar, wind, tidal, and using less energy. The first thing you have to do is stop, heating the great outdoors through absolutely the worst building, standards that exist in Europe and the UK. And so that's the first thing is you stop wasting energy and then use solar, wind, which are the cheapest ways, not compared to, a brand new power station. You could shut down a gas-fired power station, replace it with solar and wind, and it would be cheaper than keeping the gas going, particularly now. So, it's absolutely doable. It means electrifying our vehicle system. In other words, there are going to be more electric cars out there, which isn't to say electric cars solve all the problems. You get killed just as dead by being run over by an electric car as you do by a petrol car. And if a community is carved up by roads and dependence on cars, electric cars don't make that any better. They do improve the local air quality, but we have to be honest about this. Also, attached to the reality of electric cars and renewable energies are batteries. And that means things like lithium and rare earths, which are right now being mined mostly in places like Chile or in the Congo. And I think what we absolutely have to be super mindful of is that we cannot replace an economy that was based on screwing the global south for taking the oil out of the ground by screwing the global south for taking rare earths out of the ground. And it's, things are going to cost more, things are going to get harder, but it's possible to do. And I don't want to keep coming back to how hard it is. All of these things are doable now. It's just that we've gotten very used to being told the easiest way to do it is the way we're doing it right now.
So there's no dispute. The solutions and the alternatives are there. They're ready to go. That's done. We've done that bit.
Yeah, that technically 100%. Again, another situation, offshore wind. We can generate so much wind. We're an island surrounded by windy seas. People say, oh, but what happens if the wind doesn't blow, the sun doesn't shine? The wind always blows somewhere in the UK. So what you need, and the sun shines somewhere in the UK most days. So what you need then, and again, it's technical, but it's the reality is you need a grid. We need a grid that moves electricity from where it's generated to where it's used. That if, for example, if you've got an electric car, you plug it in overnight and it stores a huge amount of electricity that would be used when the wind's blowing overnight. So, again, this is about being intentional. It's about being smart, and it's about allocating resources. But it also means change. And grid connection, very, very boring subject, is the thing that is slowing down big banks and big pension firms are saying, I'm going to put a ton of money into offshore wind, for example, because if you can't connect those wind farms to the ground, if you can't use that electricity in the grid, that's not an investment. It's just a mechano set out in the sea. Right. So, I think that this is where it comes to politics. And often people say to us, well, what can you do? You can vote for people who will change the rules in the right way. Now, we are not party political. I work for Greenpeace. We're not a party political shop. But right now, the cheapest way to generate electricity in the UK is to build onshore wind farms. Right. The government, the party in power, has, for reasons best known to themselves, a de facto ban on onshore wind.
What a surprise.
Yeah. Judge however, draw whatever conclusion you like from that. Whatever their motivation is, you've got to vote for people who are not going to ban the things that solve the problem. Simple as that.
Madness. Yeah.
And that is the first step in making a difference personally, it seems to me, is that we acknowledge that our responsibility in this it doesn't rely just on what we eat or how we get around, but the choices we make politically. Can't get away from it. Small p politics, but everything's political. The personal is political.
Well, to hear you saying that as somebody that's been in the game for 30 years, if that's your analysis after being deep in this for as long as you have, then we know what we've got to do.
Yeah. It's tough. And there are, and politics means trade-off. I think that one of the things that, again, I having been doing this for a long time, for me, are we making the perfect the enemy of the good? I'm not talking about compromise here. I'm talking about better. I don't want the best thing in the world. I want the best thing in the world for my family, if I'm honest, for myself, for my kids, my community. But you know what? I'd take better. I'd take better before I would wait for best. And I think that as long as we're not shutting down options by making, decisions that are going to make the world a better place now, then that is a huge part of our personal responsibility. Then when you come to things like diet, when you come to things like personal transport choices, here's a tough one for everybody, right? That aviation is a relatively small part, flying. It's a relatively small part of the global economy. It's the fastest growing contributor of fossil fuels to climate change. And the reality is, if you want to go visit your family, I'm American and I've lived in the UK for over 30 years. If I want to go visit my family, I can paddle, I can get on a container ship. It's hard, not impossible, or I fly. But the reality is, if you fly, the people who fly the most are people who fly 3, 4, 5 times a year. It's not the family taking one holiday a year. It's multiple flyers. So how do you respond to that? Frequent flyer levy. You tax the people who fly the most, and you recycle that income. It's it's a political decision. Now, Is it going to, will that make your flight, my flight for one holiday every 3 years more expensive? Probably. But will it really extract value from the people who fly 4, 5, 6 times a year? Absolutely. And it definitely should. So I think that, again, these are kind of, we're making decisions. Fly less. Okay, absolutely. Maybe not fly at all. Okay, that's your choice. But for the people who are going to, who are not making those choices, make sure they pay, and that the benefits that they're getting are distributed much more fairly. So there are ways to address these issues, and I think that we're unlikely. I can't say never. We're unlikely to reduce love miles. The miles that people travel to, visit their family and relatives. That's a reality that I live with, and I'm prepared to live with. But you know what? I think the people who fly 6, 7, 8 times a year, I think they're going to have to pay for it.
We have to remember that the elite that we mentioned earlier, the 1%ers, they're flying in their private planes all the time.
Well,
they're not using the bus.
I think that, again, I don't think this is a radical suggestion. Private aviation, certainly private jets are in it. It's a very, very poor use of resources. Let's put it that way, to be the most generous. Right. And these are decisions that, if you're a diehard libertarian, I mean, I don't agree with people who are diehard libertarians, but they're entitled to their opinion. But if you're, and they would say, I don't want you to restrict my freedom, and I guess my response to that would be, or our response to that would be, well, your freedom is definitely impinging on other people's freedoms, like freedom to, to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And the reality is, you're getting this. It's a free ride. That 1%, as you described them, are getting a huge free ride from the 99% who are shouldering the worst impacts. So these things have to be evened out. And that's, and if we don't do that, why would a country like India, and I'm now taking this to the national and away from the personal, why would a country like India or China, which still, even though they're huge global economies and with per capita emissions much lower than the West, why would they change? Because they'd say we don't see goodwill. Now, goodwill is in short supply globally at the minute, but without at least an intention, we're not going to get there.
Well, the message I'm getting here is that it's all very well, cleaning our yogurt pots and recycling our cans and all that sort of stuff, which we should be doing anyway, because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But the real change that we need is going to come through politics.
Yeah.
It's going to come from policy change and regulation. And that's only going to happen when we elect a party into power that is actually going to enact the changes that we need, which we are far from that at the moment.
Absolutely. And I think that it sounds very distant from our personal lives. And I think, and obviously politics has been, I don't even know where to start. The last few years, politics in the UK and in the US, the two places I know the best, but lots of Europe as well, are toxic, and they're full of hate, and they're full of and they're full of selfishness, and they are based on division, not on unity. They're based on beggar thy neighbor, not love thy neighbor, to maybe be a little too gushy about it. And it has been it's really difficult to get people to feel 100% positive about politics right now. I guess the thing I would say is that personal behavior, personal choices, personal sacrifice, it's motivational, but it informs the context in which we make all of our decisions. So, I think that what's really important is to emphasize, I'm certainly not advocating that we wait for those people upstairs, the boys upstairs, to sort this shit out. I think is that we show, that individual and community-based behavior shows what we're willing to do and what we're willing to accept. And then we have to exercise the leverage that we still have in terms of our, voting and institutional politics to show that goodwill can be turned into something real. And it's a repetitive, ongoing process. It's not a binary thing where we're going to flip a switch and the world's going to be grand, or we fail to flip a switch and the world's going to be buggered. It's every day, every way. We've got to, this is an iterative process, and it seems so boring, and it makes life so hard, because it's like no problem is ever fixed. But if you don't start, you're not on the way to fixing it. So it's it's challenging, and I think that there was, the idea of, the old badge that people, that people used to wear in the 70s, think global and act local. It's true.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
there is, things become cliches and aphorisms because there is an element of truth in
For a
them.
reason. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's, that it's just as real now, unfortunately. The change that we want to see, the change we want to be, it's tougher. There's no getting around it.
Right.
But I guess the thing that encourages me, and I usually hold up my mobile phone at this point, but I left it on my desk so nobody would ring us while we were having this conversation, is the transformation in people's habits and expectations around technology. They would be unrecognizable. I mean, first iPhone was 2003. I think I got my first mobile. I got a mobile, after my kids were born. I'm quite glad about that, actually. That's another podcast, probably. But the transformation that has come from telecommunications and handheld technology is absolutely astonishing, and it's happened in less than a generation. It is possible to make social and technical change very fast. I think one of the things that we've realized is you can make technical and social change very fast, and it's not necessarily good. So we've got an opportunity to deliver some better outcomes, using technology knowingly, intelligently, and also acknowledging that it doesn't solve the problem. It's how you use it that solves the problem.
100%.
Whether it's solar, wind, electric cars, energy efficiency, heat pumps, you can pick your bit of kit that will save the world. The way we use it is the thing that is going to determine whether the world gets saved. And when I first started doing this about 30 years ago, I think there was a belief that that the green future was going to be amazing. It was all going to be community-based wind farms and food co-ops and, yogurt weaving, sandal wearing hippies. There's now some people say that wouldn't be a good outcome. So let's just put that out there.
It's debatable.
But there is a very, it's just as possible that a very small number of people and institutions could control a, zero carbon, zero deforestation, food supply and energy system. Wouldn't necessarily make the world a better place. It wouldn't mean that we don't fry the climate, but there could be a lot of anti-democratic, repressive, anti-human rights repercussions of a technologically acceptable future. So I guess that is. I think I never said this was going to be easy, but we've got to balance up. How do we keep this human and humane at the same time as avoiding the worst impacts? So I'm never going to run out of work.
Well, I hope one day you do, and I hope it's, it's in the next few decades, because otherwise we're toast. In terms of influencing our representatives. So I've had a few on the podcast. I have a lot of activists on the podcast, and they all say, at the end of it, they say the most important thing you could do in that area is to lobby your MP, write to your MP, find out where they stand on this issue, let them know how you feel about it, and obviously, hit them with your vote. But where do you stand on civil disobedience and direct action and activist groups, specifically groups such as Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil? It seems to me that there's a kind of an alignment there with the cause that Greenpeace has been a champion of for so long.
Well, we've been advocates and doing nonviolent direct action for decades. That's how I started doing this work as a physical activist, as a Greenpeace boat driver and member of our actions team. And I still go out, old fool that I am. I think direct action in and of itself won't solve the problem. I think that direct action, and I say that not because I don't believe in it. I 100% believe in it. But I think it has to be in the context of that we're after change.
Right.
And I listened, like everybody else, to the interviews with the young, particularly the young woman who was blocked the M25 motorway here in the UK. If anybody's listening internationally, a few weeks ago, and she, without question, inconvenience people. Somebody didn't make it to their father's funeral. Somebody probably didn't make it to a wedding, and that is terrible. From her point of view, the loss of 30% of the world's biodiversity, the loss of her sense of a viable future for herself and her children as a young person, I think that's pretty tragic as well. And I think that what direct action does is it creates space for change to happen. And if ever we needed to be clear that this is urgent and that we have to clear huge amounts of space for change faster than anybody wants it. That's a reality we're going to have to live with. And I know that people will. I think the main thing I would say about, particularly, what you're sitting in your car stuck in a motorway, traffic jam as a result of direct action. It's like, this isn't about you as that person. That reality of you being inconvenienced it's definitely your reality. But the person on the gantry, the person blocking that road, they're not doing it because they don't want you to get where you need to go.
Yeah.
They are doing it because they believe that we need a fundamental, overwhelming, and very, very big change in a very, very short period of time. And they're not blaming you for that, but we are all part of the. If we're going to all be part of the solution, unfortunately, right now we're all part of the problem. And I think it's, it comes back to the fact that we are going to be facing really difficult challenges. This isn't going to be comfortable for anybody, and that's that we're all involved in this, and that's why the politics matters. The direct action makes the political space available, and it will make people uncomfortable, and will lead to some very uncomfortable decisions and discussions. But without it, I think that the world isn't going to change.
100%. So as we wrap up, then, what can we leave people with that they can actually go and do?
Okay. It's just, in a simple list is you vote for the people who are going to make change happen. You let whether it's your local council, your MP, or, the people from whom you buy things, know that you want the change to happen and that you're willing to play your part in it. Of course, you make personal decisions about personal transport or, the food you eat. But ultimately, it's about, and in the UK, I'm going to give a very specific example because we're based in the UK. It's a small country. 60, nearly 70 million people now. But we're one of the biggest economies in the world. We're still in the top 7 or 8 economies in the world. If we can change, anybody can change. So don't let anybody say, oh, but what about China? What about India? What about us? We have to take responsibility for what we can change and not blame other people for what they may or may not be doing.
Amen. Charlie Kronick, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for this, man. This has been a brilliant chat, and I really do appreciate you taking time out to come and speak with us today. Thanks for everything you've done as well for the past 30 years on this issue, and I know you'll continue to do so. We appreciate you, man, and hopefully we can do this again sometime soon.
Yeah, no, we don't get the chance to talk to people for an hour very often, and the world gets cut down into 30-second sound bites. So if there is, and that's a long one. I'd love to do it again. And what would really be interesting is to reflect on, is change happening yet? If it isn't, what do we need to do now? If it is, how do we speed it up? So yeah, looking forward to it.
Maybe we'll do it this time again next year and see how we've been getting on.
It's a good time. All right. Then.
Thank you again, Charlie. It's great to meet you, man. I appreciate it.
You too. Great pleasure.
Charlie Kronick, ladies and gentlemen. Cool name, cool guy. What do you think of that? Charlie dropped some really good points and some great knowledge in that conversation, man, from some angles that I hadn't really considered before. And it is difficult when you're talking about this issue because, I've had several episodes now on the podcast where we're talking about this issue with whether it's with Extinction Rebellion or the Green Party. I try not to ask the same questions and share the same information, but it is difficult because, the case is kind of closed on this issue now. We know the science, we know the truth, we know the impending disaster, and we know the road ahead to action and change. So it's a case of urgently getting on with it now. But that said, Charlie still gave some perspectives on some things which I hadn't considered, which I found really refreshing and interesting. And I just liked his whole vibe as well. The way he explained things made it very easy to understand and digest. And he made a lot of good points about the relationship between the first world and the third, recycling, activism, and clearly laying out what the alternatives are that already exist. So I think if you're looking for a 1-hour snapshot of the climate change issue and some surrounding issues that feed into it, I think that little hour there with Charlie covers the whole range. So if you're new to this issue or you want to kind of introduce your friends or your family to this issue, please share that conversation with him, because I think Charlie lays out the case there. He puts all the science and the timelines and everything in, explains what's causing this and what the solutions are and how we get those solutions. So I think, you could either go and read an 800-page book on it, or you can just listen to that 1-hour chat with the awesomely named Mr. Charlie Kronick and give yourself a full debriefing on the climate change issue and the road to recovery. I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it interesting and informative. If you did, subscribe to the goddamn channel. I'm going to ask you again. Give me a follow. Give me a star rating. Give me a review. Give me a thumbs up. Give me something, goddammit. And spread the word. Because, man, we have got some beasts coming up in the new year. So as long as you guys are interested, I'll keep having these conversations and feeding them into your earlobes. So show me some love. Let me know, that you're interested. Let me know that you care and appreciate it. And I'll reciprocate in kind. Got a special one for you guys next week, so stick around for that one for what will more than likely be the last one for 2022. And in the meantime, look after yourselves, be awesome, and do awesome. And I shall catch you next week. Love you loads. Bye-bye.